All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ajax Public Library's virtual author visit with Heather Tucker, one of this year's Culture Days events. My name's Julia Campbell, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Public Library. I just wanted to start by covering a couple of housekeeping items. Tonight's event is being recorded, so I would ask that you please keep your webcam and microphones off so that you are not displayed or heard in the recording. And the recording will be posted to the Ajax Library YouTube channel in the next couple of days. We have a live transcription of our program today, so if you would like to turn on subtitles, you can do so by clicking Live Transcript at the bottom of the screen and then Show Subtitles. If you experience any technical difficulties, I recommend that you exit the Zoom and re-enter. If you continue to have difficulties, please place a comment in the chat and I will do my best to assist you. We will have some time for questions from the audience, so if you have any questions for Heather, please place them in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the program. So now it is my pleasure to introduce local author Heather Tucker. Throughout a long and varied career in the health sciences, Heather has gathered stories from nursing internationally to her experience as a teacher, a public health and psychiatric nurse, and bereavement counselor. She worked extensively as a professional writer, developing educational resources, policy, and curricula, until discovering that playing with words is more fun than working with them. Her stories have appeared in literary publications, anthologies, including Wicked Words, From the Cottage Porch, and Wild Words, as well as online. She is the winner of New York's Literal Latte Fiction Award and the Writers Union of Canada Short Prose Competition, a four-time winner of the Writers Community of Durham Region Short Story Contest, as well as a finalist in the Australian Book Review, Elizabeth Jolly Prize, Writers Union of Canada Short Prose Contest, Prism International Nonfiction Prize, Malahat Novella Prize, the Constance Rook Creative Nonfiction Prize, and Far Horizons competitions. Her debut novel, The Clay Girl, was released in October 2016 by ECW Press and was the American Booksellers Association debut pick, a finalist for the Atlantic Book and the Kobo Emerging Author Award, and was voted by readers into the top 10 on the Canada 150 Best Books list. She is a graduate of the University of Toronto, the Humber School for Writers, the Institute of Children's Literature, and is a member of the Writers Union of Canada and the Writers Community of Durham Region. Heather and her imaginary friends can be found in Ajax, Ontario. Her most recent novel, Cracked Pots, the sequel to The Clay Girl, was released just 2 weeks ago on October the 5th. Both novels tell the story of Harriet, known as Ari Appleton, who is sculpted by kindness, cruelty, and the extraordinary power of imagination, and her families, the one that she's born into and the one that she creates. We are very lucky to have Heather with us this evening, so without further ado, I will turn it over to Heather to introduce herself and to read us a selection from her new novel, Cracked Pots. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I can't see everybody. I'm afraid to come out of my screen and go back in. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. And thank you, Julia, for hosting this. I love libraries. So this is so much fun for me. And I can't wait till we can start connecting. Okay, I'm going to just start at the very beginning of the book and just read a short excerpt from it. I will say that the audiobook will be released soon, and Laura Kaswati is just does an amazing job. So she will do reading it much more. So for those of you who read Clay Girl, at the very end, she's returning to Toronto with Mikey. So this book starts on the train back to Toronto. The train slows. Mechanical wizardry, air, and friction working together is bringing this massive locomotive to a precise stop. Mikey tells me this. At 8 years old, he loves the physics involved. Me? I just wonder how I'll move my 126 pounds of cells through the warped space and time ahead. I know where I am without clearing the window. Still, I wipe away the condensation. The familiar landmark comes into view. When I was 8, John 3:16 was painted in big letters on the barn's roof. Now, at 16, just rusty holes and a faint 06 remain. My oh shit point on each journey back to Toronto. It's here where I feel most stretched in two, pulled east back to my aunts, to Clay, to Jake, and forced west, to chaos, to waste, to Aaron. Bloody hell, Jasper, don't start stirring this up again. Outside, a girl races the train, hair flying like a charm of finches. Her hand lifts and pop, pop, poppity pop. Mikey's head snaps from the pillow. What's that? Just a kid throwing firecrackers. Where are we? 800 miles and 4 long months from Cape Breton, Quebec. The passenger car is hot as soup. Mikey tucks up, stretching his worn undershirt over his summer-scraped legs. He studies my swollen cheek. Does it hurt? Really bad. Mrs. Butters, tell Huey that the rock slide was an omen. Neck hairs. Oh, you know the missus is the cove's tall tale spinner. She's always telling chivalry stories. It was just the heavy rains and growing roots that caused it. He scratches at a mosquito bite on his ankle. Maybe so. Just seems off when water breaks rock. And there was all that other stuff. William, the train steward, directs a roly-poly man our way. Well, little miss, look what I found. I'm years and inches past being little. But through all my rides, I can't recall a trip where William hasn't taken care of me. The man is a doctor, conscripted from somewhere on the train. He plunks down, eyeing my cheek with half spectacles. Good gracious, what happened here? Mikey says, a rock dinged her. Now, who throws stones at such a pretty girl? He opens his bag. When did this happen? Friday. Eyes open, eyes closed. I see it. Birds rocketing from the ridge seconds before the sonic crack. Then a boulder, big as a bus, ripping away, cartwheeling into the ocean. Water, red with dirt, pluming, rocks, stones, pebbles cascading, trickling, then dead quiet. In the settling dust, I looked up. The path to the acres we named Moondance, gone. By a root, a young cedar swung like an acrobat. Atop the ridge, Jake stood, peering down, looking as terrified as me. Weeks before, same night as men walked on the moon, Jake and I went all the way. Sleeping with a boy was still cosmic with newness. And there I was in the rubble, sensing in 3 days, 2 nights, 1 morning, I'd be launched away. I'll stop there. I must say, I'm waiting for the large print version. It's hard to read this font.
Thank you, Heather. That was beautiful. I could listen to you read for hours. So I'm going to start with some questions, and then we're going to have some questions from the audience. So my first question
Okay.
is, can you talk a little bit about your journey to become a novelist, and have you always been a writer?
Well, I would say I've always been a reader since a wonderful librarian first introduced me to Pippi Longstocking. And I think I've always been a storyteller and a story gatherer. But as far as a writer, my writing has been confined to technical writing. And also journaling. I've always been what I call it an emotive journaler. So I would journal out if I had problems or issues. But as for writing fiction, it never entered my mind that it was something I'd be allowed to do, because writers of these wonderful stories were almost magical, mythical beings to me. So how I came to this place was in my 50s. I was planning a trip to the Far East, and I had this niggling terror that if the plane went down, my kids were going to read my journals. And if they read my journals, they would think that I was depressed, that I was disappointed, that maybe I was a bit devastated by life. But because I processed in my journals, I wasn't any of those things. I think I could say I was joyful, I was hopeful, I was wiser, I was more compassionate because I had worked through those things. So I decided that these journals could not be the legacy that I left behind. So I packed them in a box, I took them up north, and I set fire to all of them. And it was this transformational energy shift where I just saw the stories changing energy and changing form and becoming something new and something different. And I've sent Julie a few examples of where my writing went from the technical side and the emotive journaling to, once I set fire to these journals, I started doing what I called visual journaling, which was basically playing on the page. So I've sent Julia, yeah, she's got some pictures of some pages from my journals. And you could see that if somebody was looking at them, they would see that I was hopeful, I was playing with color, I was feeling joyful, and I wanted this to be the legacy that I left behind. And as I started doing this playful journaling, all my stories started transmute into fiction, and characters started speaking to me, and plot lines started to just almost visit me and play with me. And so that is how I started writing fiction. And it wasn't until I was well into my 50s that I started even contemplating that I could do this. So that's been a bit of my writing journey. And since then, I've been, instead of working with words, I've been playing with them and having a great time doing it.
Great, thank you. And hopefully everybody can see some of Heather's beautiful visual journals here.
That's my dog's head, by the way. Isn't she cute?
Yes,
I
very
have enough,
cute.
I have enough, I do enough. Yes, that's my mantra.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. So I wanted to ask you about clay because the idea of clay is important throughout both novels. And it's described as moldable, a ball of possibilities, and that we as people are all lumps of clay. It's up to us what we make of it. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of clay in the novels and kind of where the title of the Clay Girl came from?
Mhm. Well, once I started writing, I decided that that not only did I want to, I needed to tell redemptive stories, stories that showed the resilience of the human spirit. And the whole metaphor of the idea that we are clay rather than our destiny being set in stone is very hopeful to me. So with the Clay Girl, the story is really about nurture, I think. And the idea that even though Ari's family is really dysfunctional and she, is confronted with so many difficulties, she has these wonderful nurturers in her life, her aunts, her teachers, her stepdad, the Zajac clan. They are the molders of this really vulnerable child. And so the title, The Clay Girl, came from the idea that young children need to be nurtured, even especially ones that are in very vulnerable situations. They need to have, those wonderful molding hands around them, helping them become who they can become. Hello. And so that the second book, Crackpots, I think is more about nature, and it's looking more. Ari's looking back at who is she going to become, because she is the child of the family she's come from. And I think it's probably something that most teenagers go through, or all of us go through at sometime in our life, figuring out who we are. So looking at the whole metaphor of, I don't know if people are familiar with the art of Kintsugi. It's where an artist will take something that's broken, a broken piece of pottery, and they'll piece it back together with gold. So it's the idea that we can piece together our life and glue it back into something new and something precious and more valuable than something that's perfect through this art. So the idea of a cracked pot is sort of Ari coming to terms with who she is in the world, and the idea that she can piece together her life. She still needs the gold of her families and her creative pursuits and her aunts and the people that love and care for her, but she has the agency to piece together her life into something. And I just love the idea that broken things can be brought back together and pieced into something that's more valuable than something that's perfect. That's certainly hopeful for me, because I certainly consider myself a cracked pot. So I like the idea that we can become something more beautiful from being broken.
I love that. And I just want to show a picture of the cover of Cracked Pots so that everyone can see that image of the pot with the gold shining through the cracks, just so you can get an idea of what Heather was just speaking about. Next, I want to talk about imagination because from the very beginning, Ari, the main character, has a vivid imagination and such a unique view of the world. I'm thinking at the beginning when she's getting on the train as a child and she's envisioning it as a dragon, but that imagination kind of stays with her throughout the books. So,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about the role of imagination and why that was so important?
Well, I really believe that the stories we tell ourselves shape us. So the more wonderful we can imagine the world around us and the possibilities, um, the more beautiful the shaping will be. I think we've all had the experience where our imagination can scare us half to death. So in the book, I wanted to portray that even in the most devastating circumstances, there's power behind imagination. There's power behind the stories we tell ourselves. There's when you mentioned Ari getting on the train and seeing a dragon, how terrifying for a young girl, 8 years old. She's got underpants on. Her family's fallen apart. She doesn't really know what's happened. She's put on a train to go to these aunts that are told, they eat little girls. But she's seeing it as she's climbing up onto a dragon. That's a very powerful image that she has, and she transfers the whole experience into really an adventure. And so that for me, the importance of allowing her to have her bright, wonderfully thought out world internally was a gift that I could give her when she was facing difficult circumstances. And I think also from my experience with children facing trauma, often it's difficult for a child to face what's happening head on. And using magic, using imagination can really be a way for them to cope with difficult circumstances. So it was important for me to give her that internal, wonderful world that could be a respite to her when the whole external world is a very, very scary place.
Thank you. And another way that Ari copes is through her imaginary friend, Jasper, who is a
Yeah,
seahorse. And I just wanted to
yeah,
show you on the cover of the clay girl with the seahorse on the front. So it seems that animals are really important in the novels, especially since Ari, when she sees other people, she sort of sees their animal form, which
yeah,
I found really interesting. So I was just hoping
yeah,
you could talk a little bit more about the importance of animals in the
yeah.
novels.
Well, when I first met Ari in my imagination, really the only thing I knew about her was that she had a seahorse in her pocket. And it even took me a little while to figure out that it was an imaginary seahorse. For a while there, I thought maybe she had a stuffed seahorse or a desiccated seahorse or something in there, but I found out it was, just part of her imaginary world was this, but to her it was very, very real. And as I got to know her, I realized that the animals that she saw in people was her way of making sense out of the adult human behavior. So um, uh, looking at one as, why is this person a predator? Well, she sees a piranha in her. Why is another one grounded like a turtle, or unconditionally loving like a Labrador, or gentle like a deer, or protective like a mother bear? It was her way of explaining the world around her. So I saw the animals as really an extension of her imagination. And also it was, I think, part of her coping mechanism because, for example, let's go back to the train. This is traumatized little girl on a train. How wonderful to have a walrus, somebody that she sees as this, a gentle, wise walrus doling out, jewels and treasures on every, train ride that she happens on, and, telling her that everything's going to be okay. Or how wonderful that she does have a seahorse, because if you look at what a seahorse can show her, one is, the remarkable creatures in that they can stay upright. Really, if you look at them, if you look at that picture that you just showed of Jasper, his head is so heavy, he should just fall over. But he has his air bubble inside. He has this little jewel inside that rights him. And when the seas get really rocky, he takes his tail and he grabs onto something solid, which is a life lesson. Ari grabs onto her aunts, her, people who care about her, her teachers, and she looks inward to this, I think this resilience that's inside her to help her maintain balance in a very unbalanced world. So that's why the animals are there. And, they're just, they're fun, and I think the natural world has a lot to teach us and to tell us. And, Ari is just in tune with that.
Great, thank you. I wanted to ask you about setting, because the two main settings in the novels are Toronto and Cape Breton, and Ari kind of goes back and forth throughout both novels. So we're just wondering why you chose those two locations, and someone from the audience also asked if the East Coast is special to you, Heather.
Okay. So first of all, Toronto. I grew up in Toronto, and so there was, when they say write what you know, there was that familiarity of the city and what Yorkville was like back in the 60s and 70s, and the beaches area and the Goof restaurant. So those were all things that I could borrow on my own experience in creating that environment. There was also something very interesting about Toronto in that it really was, apart from Vancouver, really the central point in Canada where the whole 60s and 70s was being explored. And when you think, when I juxtapose the fact that there was free love and, all the drug culture in Yorkville against the fact that Ari was really dealing with sexual abuse and addictive parents who were addictive. So it's, so there was this romantic notion of the free love and the drug culture, but for her it was this really terrible reality. So it was an interesting backdrop for that part of the story to evolve. Now the East Coast, I think I don't know why I feel so connected to the East Coast. Maybe I lived another life there. I don't know. But for me, it has been the most healing place on earth. There's something about the natural beauty. There's something about the just be close to the ocean. The community that's there, like you can walk down the street and people know you and talk to you, even though you're from away. They want to know your story. They want to connect with you. The music that's there, the art that's there, there's just something that I just feel healed when I'm there. So when I needed to find a place to send a traumatized little girl, and then the stepbrother she's saddled with and needs to take care of, I just knew I had to send them, find a place on the East Coast to send them. And because I feel such healing when I'm in Cape Breton, I knew where I would be sending them. And the Skyfish is a very real gallery that I spent a day there with my daughter thinking this would just be heaven to just stay here and to be around these people and this art and this beauty. So that's my connection to the East Coast. I don't know where it comes from, but it's a very powerful one.
Thank you. And I love how you describe the East Coast as healing, because that was the sense that I got that was coming from Ari, is that every time she was in Cape Breton, it was
Mhm.
home to her. She felt comfortable. She felt in a safe space, and that setting was so important to the novel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there's not it's not a magical ideal place, really. I know that it's hard scrabble there, but even the overcoming is quite wonderful on the East Coast, because there is poverty, there is addiction, but there's also this resilience and this really a sense of overcoming that I think is as important as the natural beauty and the art and the music. Did I lose you, Julia?
Nope, I'm still here.
Okay. All I have is this little pretend head on the screen, and I'm just like, oh, talking to a pretend head.
My next question is about why you chose to set the novels in the past, so in the 1960s and the 70s, instead of the present day.
Okay, I think the weighty topics in it, they're really universal and timeless. The dysfunctional families, the bullying, the addictions, the discovering your sexuality, the abuse, love, loss. Growing up is hard to do in any decade. But the reason I chose to go back to the 60s, one, I wanted to sort of relive some of that myself. I wanted to experience it in a different way. But really, if I'd said it today, I could not have the same connection that Ari had with her teachers. I couldn't have the same, I couldn't put Ari at the same risk that I put her in back in the 60s. For example, if a teacher saw bruises on a child in today's setting, they couldn't make a decision that maybe it's not best for this child that we report this. They would have to report it. Teachers could not have the same close connection that they have with Ari in this book. I think the relationship she has with the police officer has changed quite a bit. When you look at today's culture, the police culture back in the 60s, I think.
Thank you.
You're
So I
welcome.
wanted to ask you about the character of Ari. She goes through so much in the book because of her dysfunctional family and the harmful decisions that her parents make, but she has so much resilience. So where did Ari come as a character, and what accounts for her resilience? What gives her the strength to keep going after so much that she's gone through?
Okay, I'll preface that by saying that I do realize that sometimes Ari just seems too good to be true. And I do know that kids in Ari's situation, facing the kind of dysfunction she faced, are more likely to end up repeating generational patterns. That would be the, if I was doing a case study on these kids, that would be the more typical response. But I know Ari's, I've worked with Ari's, I've worked with these exceptional kids who despite the most difficult life experiences, they not only survive, they thrive. And they often become the rescuers. So I know kids that have gone through just horrific family situations and losses. And, they become teachers, they become police officers, they become social workers because they know what it's like and they want to help. So Ari has come, I see her as a mosaic of all the remarkable kids that I've had the privilege of knowing through my career. So you ask where her resilience comes from. And when I was working on Clay Girl, I was also doing a resiliency resource for the school board. And the research was showing that kids, there's 3 foundations to building resilient kids. One is they have a somebody in their corner, a significant adult who says, I'm there for you. You need me, I'm there for you. Or simply as the one that builds them up, saying, you're a good kid, you're a great kid. I have a lot of faith in you that you're going to do great things. So her resilience comes from the fact that she has those significant people, even though her parents are dysfunctional. She has significant adults in her life. The second thing was, does a child have a creative outlet for all their negative energy? Do they have some way to dispel all of the energy through something positive and creative, something that gives them a feeling of satisfaction, accomplishment, and meaning? And the third thing is, do they have an internal voice that is on a positive loop, or do they have an internal voice that's on a negative loop? So resilient kids have those internal voices that say, I can't do this yet, but I'm going to figure out how to do it. Instead of the kid says, I can't do this, I'm never going to be able to do this. The kid that says, I'm smart, I can do this, or the kid that says, I'm stupid, I can't do this. Nobody likes me. I'm going to do things to make people like me. So really that voice in her head is that positive loop that I think we all need it, right? If we can all tell ourselves negative things, and the outcome is never as good as if we tell ourselves positive stories. So those are really the foundational things where Ari gets her resilience from.
Thank you. And you mentioned it briefly, but I just want to get back to the idea of creativity and sort of that being one way that Ari deals with her emotions and her trauma through writing and through creating art and pottery. So, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of creativity and having that creative outlet?
I think every human being needs to have meaning and movement in their life. And it's through creativity that I think we do attain that feeling of what I'm doing has meaning, and we do feel ourselves moving. There's nothing worse than feeling stuck or not empowered to make something in our life. If we make something, we just feel better. And I think we often mistake creativity with art, music, actually sort of producing something that is, sort of a material kind of thing. But creativity to me is so expansive. I mean, creativity is climbing, it's gardening, it's scouting, it's sports, it's connecting, it's growing something, it's solving a problem in the community, it's becoming, socially engaged and politically active. Like creativity is so expansive that everybody has a channel that they can be creative in. I have people say, oh, I'm just not creative. Everybody is creative or can be creative. And if everybody created the same thing, then that would be pretty boring. So I think it's wonderful that we can look at creativity in a very expansive way. Creativity can be walking, hiking, walking, absorbing nature. And, when I look at Ari's creativity, we think, the pottery and her painting and her writing. But for me, the even more creative was her caring for Mikey. That was a very creative thing to do. More creative was her seeing the rock fall that I read at the beginning and picking up those rocks and making her house and building the hearth. Walking along the shore and picking up little bits and pieces of shore treasures and then piecing them together into something, that was just flotsam into art. So I see those bits of creativity as even more important for Ari's growth and development than the fact that she could make a beautiful pot or, an interesting sculpture.
Great, thank you. I want to get to some of our audience questions. So the
Mhm.
first one was, does one need to read the prior book before this one?
It would help because Ari's childhood is pretty complex. But the difficulty in writing Crackpots was a sequel really needs to stand on its own, so you can pick it up and you have a starting point, something happens that makes you want to follow through. So I believe it can stand on its own, but I think it's a much richer reading experience if you start with Ari at 8 and understand where she's come from and sort of why she's in the place where she's at. Well, you tell me, Julie, because you just read the first one and then the second one. Would it have been a challenge for you to follow the story with just Crackpots?
I think you're right that you could probably read it on its own, but I would recommend reading The Clay Girl first just so that you have Ari's backstory and her history. I feel like you enjoy Cracked Pots so much more, kind of knowing exactly where she's come from.
Yeah.
The next question is there anyone or any experience which inspired these stories?
Oh my goodness. I like to say that I put in a half century of research before I started writing. So The Clay Girl and Crackpots are works of fiction. They are, when it says that little disclaimer that any, similarity to real life events is purely coincidental. But when I stand back and look at it, I really see it's a mosaic of, I look at the teachers in it and I think of the teachers that inspired me and that were there for my kids growing up. I think of the coaches, the step parents, when I was working in public health, and I would go into some situations where the children were in just, very difficult situations. And I would meet these remarkable step parents who, they weren't their biological children, but they had stepped in to try to rescue and to create a home that would be, safe for these children. So I would say I've been inspired by just the wonderful stories that I've had the privilege of being part of through my work and my personal life. And, like I said at the beginning, I'm a storyteller, but I'm also a story gatherer. So if you've gathered stories and then you let the energy, which, it changed from nonfiction to fiction, you can tell a more overarching story, I think, using the sort of the fodder of where your life has been and what you've experienced. You can, well, it's like the crack pot. You can piece it together into a whole, beautiful piece of valuable pottery.
Great, thank you. And just to follow up with that, somebody asked, what did Heather do in healthcare to give her the opportunity to work with kids like Ari?
Oh, what did I do in healthcare? I've had a fairly eclectic career. I started off working at the Clark Institute with a lot of young adolescents that were facing a lot of difficulty and trauma. Worked at Whitby, now it's Ontario Shores Mental Health Center. I worked there when it was Whitby Psych, 7 years straight nights, which was, wonderful opportunities to want to appreciate my life and also to meet some wonderful healthcare heroes and also clients who just, were overcomers and just struggling with life. Worked for years in public health as the school nurse where, any child that was having difficulty in school would be, referred to me, and I would do home assessments and then try to figure out a plan for helping them deal with whatever issues they were facing. I also volunteered for 12 years with an amazing organization, Brief Families of Durham Region, and worked with so many kids who had lost siblings and parents who were facing the trauma of having lost their precious child and how that impacted families. So I've just had so many wonderful opportunities to connect with people. And, as we have children, they bring children into our lives where, we had children staying here that just needed a support place for a time in their life. And again, they brought me stories that are threads for weaving into, now this wonderful phase of my life where I get to tell those stories in a way that I think really reflects how much hope I have in people. And that's just
Thank
part of
you.
my job. I have lots of other jobs.
But I would agree that even though there's so much tragedy and hardships for Ari, the overall feeling of the book is still one of hope and resilience, and that really comes through.
Yeah. And that is really important to me, is that I don't want to write books where people close it and think, oh, geez, I feel depressed or I feel hopeless or sad. I want, the only reason I'm writing is to think, I love to read a book where I close it and I feel a sense of hope. You can, make me feel unhappy or despair or loss, but please don't leave me without hope. And I think there is a lot to be hopeful for. And so that's what the joy for me of writing is, to think, how do I tell these stories in a way that leaves people feeling hopeful?
Great, thank you. The next question is about reading, and someone asked, can you comment on the relationship between reading and writing? I am assuming that you are also a reader, and do the two processes coexist?
Let's just, I don't even know how to describe how important reading is to the process of writing, one, but to the process of living. I am an avid reader, and that love of reading started with the bookmobile back in 1959. I think it was the first time the bookmobile, drove out to the bottom of my street, where the librarian saw in me a need to connect with heroines in literature, and just introduced me to these Pippi Longstocking and Anne with an E and Emily and Laura and Mary, the Ingalls girls. And they were an inspiration to me from a very young age. And that love and that need only has grown. I don't know how people can write and and not read. I know there are some writers who sort of will put aside books while they're working on a project. But I find that it's my Prozac, it's my alcohol, it's my, it puts me to sleep at night, and it helps me wake up. It helps me refocus. It inspires me. It helps me understand different ways of thinking. It also helps me know what I don't want to write. If something leaves me feeling sad, I'm thinking I don't want to write something like that. I want to write something that's hopeful and that shows the promise of the human spirit. So I'm an avid reader. I read all kinds of genres. I read. I like to read globally from books around the world. I need poetry. As part of that mix, I like books that are funny. I like books that are sad but hopeful. I like mysteries. I like, literary fiction. I just hate books where they kill the dog. I just, those are not my favorite books where the dog dies. I don't like those books. So does that answer the question? I need to read.
Yes, definitely that answers the question. And just to follow up with that, do you have any current favorite authors or authors that inspire you?
Well, you posed that question to me, and it was just like, how do I even begin to answer that question? Because it's so changeable with the time of day. What I want to read in the morning is quite different than what I'm reading at night, or if the news has set me in a spin, what I want to read. If I look at a lifelong of reading, I would have to say Lucy Maud Montgomery is one of the biggest influencers because of her resilient, feisty characters. And it's a generational thing for me because I met her as a little girl. I read her to my children. I'm reading her to my grandchildren. And that a story has that kind of longevity, I think, is profound. Barbara Kingsolver inspires me in the way that she always brings in social issues or environmental issues amidst these wonderful stories. So I'm always motivated to change almost after I read her stories. Richard Wagamese, the way he connects me to nature, I just am so inspired by his writing. And I could go on and on because there's just so many books that have just so impacted my life and are almost part of my DNA. And I have to have a book by Mary Oliver, her poetry, with me all the time. It's like my purse book that it's just with me all the time, it seems.
Thank you. I know that's a really hard question to answer, especially as a reader, because there are so many amazing authors out there.
Yeah.
The next question is, I would like to hear from Heather about how she developed such an amazing ability to put words together so beautifully. Her writing is poetically descriptive and unlike anything I've ever read before.
All I can say is that I don't know how when people introduce the author, I usually look over my shoulder and say, there's an author here, because it's astonishing to me that, there's my books are on the library shelf. It's just absolutely astonishing to me. All I can say is that I'm a stalker when I write. So that Ari came to me and she told me her story and I wrote it down. So the voice in the Clay Girl and Crackpots, I don't feel like it's my voice. I feel like it's this 8-year-old child that came to me and grew up with me. and talk to me through her. So I feel like I'm more recorded who she is. So if you read something else that I write, the voice is quite different because I really feel that my characters talk to me and they tell me what to write and they tell me how, and I hear what they're saying. I think back when I worked in psychiatry, if somebody said there were characters in my head talking to me, would probably medicate them. But now I'm thinking they were just writers, that heard all these characters in their head. So I feel like, whoever asked that question, you have just connected with this universal spirit of this little resilient girl. It's her voice, it's her story, it's her prose, it's any music you hear in it, any poetry you hear in it. I was just the recorder of it. So if you read another work, you'll hear a completely different voice because we're translating and writing it, and I don't know if I'm explaining that properly, but I don't work at it. I just listen and let my character speak. And usually I don't interfere. And that's why a lot of people said at the beginning of Clay Girl, they were really confused and didn't know what this little girl was talking about, where she was going. And I was just like, she's 8 years old. She's gone through trauma. She's confused. I can't help it. I could tell her story and I'm confused. Is unconfused a word? I'm not sure. I could help them, understand what's going through Ari's head, but it was Ari's story to tell, not my story to tell. So I don't know if that sounds crazy, but that's how I wrote it. And that's how her voice, that's why her voice sounds like it sounds.
Great, thank you. And I know Cracked Pots just came out a couple of weeks ago, but are you working on another novel? And do you have any plans to continue Ari Appleton's story in future?
I have several novels that are written. And so the one I'm working on right now is called Smoking Water. I'm in the editing phase of that one. And it's a completely different story. It's about a young Canadian nurse working in Ethiopia during the famine in 1974 and the overthrow of Haile Selassie. And so it is a time when I was in Ethiopia working there during the famine, but it's not autobiographical. It again is a mosaic of the world that really mobilized to help during this horrible tragic event. So that is the project I'm working on right now. Hopefully it'll be out so much sooner than it took me to get Crackpots to the market. As for another Ari story, there is a third novel, and it's set more in the future. So for those of you that are familiar with the book, Ari's sister June disappears and she has a little girl named Spring. And so in the next book, Spring's 3 daughters land on Ari's doorstep in Cape Breton. So it's really their story, and Ari and Jake are now in the position that Mary and Nia were in when they rescued Ari. So it's like the rescued becoming the rescuer. But I need another, I don't know. I'm hoping the universe gives me another 40 years to finish the novels I have. I don't know if that's, being greedy, but that one's, there's a few other universes of characters that have lined up before the third Ari book. So let's hope, I have the time to do it. So that's where I'm at right now.
Great, thank you.
Oh,
Well,
is that
we're 2 minutes to 8, so we're almost out of time. So I just wanted to thank you, Heather, so much for joining us tonight and for telling us about your incredible novel and some of the processes behind it and what inspired the novels as well. I wanted to mention that there are signed copies of Cracked Pots in 2 different bookstores in Port Perry, so at Books Galore and Blue Heron Books. So if
Yeah.
you would like a signed copy of Cracked Pots, I would encourage you to go there. The library also has copies of both The Clay Girl and Crack Pots in our collection. They are incredible novels, so if you haven't read them already, I would encourage everybody to go out and read them. And I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us tonight.
And I love to come to book clubs. So if anybody has a book club, I love to come to them.